Hello, everyone. Welcome to Church Coffee. My name is Rob, and today we are joined with Tim O'Neill from the blog website History for Atheists. Tim is someone that I've greatly respected over the years for fighting historical misinformation online. And before we really jump into it, Tim, you want to give us just a little bio real quick?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on, Rob. I'm an atheist, but I'm not one of those atheists. So I'm actually an atheist who doesn't think that all religious people are stupid, deluded, I actually have some of my best friends and even some of my relatives are believers. So I'm not one of these atheists who feels the need to try and convert people. I just happen to not have a belief in God or gods. But where History for Atheists comes from is that I suppose I started to get annoyed with a lot of my fellow atheists who have a tendency to many of them, make arguments about religion based on history, and often they get their history wrong. And often, unfortunately, they don't really care that they're getting their history wrong. So I do care about history a lot. And so I began a blog, and it's now sort of developed into a website, a podcast, and a video channel, which basically debunks a lot of bad atheist history and tries to get my fellow atheists to sort of see that claiming things like Christians burned down the Great Library of Alexandria, or the Pope Pius the 12th was pro-Nazi. These things are wrong, and you shouldn't say things that are wrong, particularly if you're claiming to be a rationalist. As a result, I have a lot of fans who are atheists and who say thank you for correcting me on this, and now I won't use that argument. And I have a lot of opponents who don't like me at all. And also, I've got a lot of weirdly, I've got a lot of fans who are Christians who like the fact that I'm debunking atheists. I should add that not on my website, but in other places, particularly on Twitter, I debunk Christian bad history as well. I'm quite equal opportunity when it comes to debunking bad history. So I'm not some kind of atheist who's pandering to Christians, as I think, Rob, you would probably know since you follow me on Twitter.
Yeah, I would definitely say you are an equal opportunity offender. Now, being an Australian, though, we normally ask people what's your favorite coffee, but I get the sense that you might not be a coffee drinker. Or what's perhaps your favorite hot caffeinated beverage?
No, Australians are fanatical coffee drinkers.
Oh, okay.
We love our coffee. I personally will drink coffee, maybe once or twice a week, but most people I know, it's a daily thing. The thing about Australian coffee, though, is that we were a nation of tea drinkers up until the 1950s. And then we had this influx of mainly Italian and also Greek migrants who introduced us to espresso. And
Mm.
we've really sort of adopted it. But as a result, we're total coffee snobs. So everyone who goes to the United States comes back and says the coffee over there tastes like burnt dirt, and it's absolutely disgusting. Starbucks actually thought that they would expand into Australia in the late 90s. They opened hundreds and hundreds of stores across Australia, and it was a total failure because their style of coffee is just not the coffee that Australians like to drink. It's too sweet, too milky, and too lukewarm. We like our strong, hot, and proper espresso. So my favourite coffee is an Australian contribution to coffee culture called the flat white, which is like a
Mhm.
cross between an espresso and a latte. So it's stronger than an espresso, but still kind of milky. So I drink a flat white, and I drink a particular blend. And again, Aussies will walk past two or three cafes to go to the cafe
Mm.
that makes coffee from their favourite blend. So my blend is Campos, which is a Sydney-based company. Really, really good blend. So Campos Flat White is my coffee.
There you go. Yeah, I would say that 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 stereotype of Americans is probably true mostly because um, we love putting sugar and cream and just dumping that into our coffee. Um, I myself, we are actually sponsored. This podcast is sponsored by a local micro roaster whose
Oh,
coffee I'm
good.
drinking. I'm drinking their 100% Sumatran right now, straight black, which is quite delicious. But yes, most Americans that I know will take a very dark roast and then just dump sugar in coffee and tea. But I think my generation's getting a lot better about that. I will
Getting
say
that impression.
yeah,
We
the
have
millennials
actually,
and definitely I think the millennials and the Gen Xers are pretty coffee snobbish. The Gen Zers right now seem to be swinging back to like almost 100% sugar. They love their sugary Starbucks drinks, which is sad because that's not straight coffee.
we have actually exported the flat white to the United States. Some Australian guys have set up cafes over there because they couldn't get what they thought was a good coffee in America. So it's now we've now started to colonize you. So
I'll take that. I loved Australian culture when I was there.
cool.
All right, so we'll just jump right in. What kind of got you into this research endeavor? I asked that not just out of general curiosity, but also because your articles are very detailed, and I can only imagine that like hours and hours of research goes into them. I guess maybe asked another way, like what drives you to do this? I think you probably already answered that a little bit in the intro, but maybe go a little deeper for us.
Well, I've always been interested in history, and I have a particular focus on ancient and medieval history, particularly medieval history. I went to university and studied both history and literature. I ended up specializing more in literature, so I did a master's degree in medieval poetry, but it was almost like a historical analysis of medieval poetry. So it was what's called a historicist approach, or a new historicist approach. But even though that's where my degrees ended up specializing, I'm probably a history guy primarily. And certainly these days, I read far more history than I read literature. So it's just been a lifelong passion. I'm a pretty voracious reader, and I don't read a lot of sort of light entertainment stuff. I tend to read pretty heavy academic stuff because that's just my preference. So yeah, I do put a lot of work into the articles I write on History for Atheists, because so much stuff you see online is just sort of light assertion, and a lot of articles are just I find a little superficial, and I'm trying to counter that. So as a result, my articles average about somewhere between 7,000 to 10,000 words, which is probably too long for most people. But so what I've done since is I've started a video channel where I'm doing sort of video versions of a lot of my articles, as well as interviews with historians and other history writers. And then I'm doing a podcast version of that for people who like to listen to the audio version. But I'm finding even those videos I link to them and say, okay, here's where I cover this, and people don't bother watching them. So I'm possibly going to have to go onto TikTok and slowly get the message out there, which means I'm going to have to limit myself to a much shorter format. I tend to be wordy. But this is the thing. In order to get history right, you have to be detailed. And the problem with a lot of these myths is that they're very glib. And we'll talk about this when we start talking about the ones associated with Christmas. They're very glib. They're very easily digestible. And there's an asymmetry to this. It takes a lot longer to debunk a myth that can be stated very quickly than it does to state the myth. So
yeah, a lie travels around the world before the truth can get its shoes on, right?
Exactly right. Yeah.
What are the 3 most common Christmas pagan myths that you encounter? Just kind of gut check.
Okay. They're all kind of interconnected, but like the first one is the date. So the reason December 25th is the date is not because Jesus was born then, because the Bible doesn't actually tell us exactly when he was born. It's because Christians stole a pagan festival. Now, which pagan festival they stole is often varies from myth to myth, but that's the general sort of myth. The Christians stole a pagan festival that was on December 25th. So that's probably the number one. Number two, most of the traditions we have associated with Christmas, gift giving and wreaths and the decorations and all of that stuff, mistletoe and holly and so on. This is all pagan. That stuff was all originally part of this pagan festival, depending on which one they're claiming. And as a result, Christians just kind of took that over. And so all of this stuff that we're doing is actually pagan. And then the third one is related to that, and that's about Christmas trees. Christmas trees were originally a pagan thing. They were part of the festival, Saturnalia or Yule, and so it just continued. And so when you're putting up a Christmas tree, what you're doing is actually doing something that's quite pagan. It's all associated with various forms of paganism. Those are the three main ones, and they're all wrong.
What are the myths you find more common to, say, fundamentalist Christians, and are there others that are more popular to atheists, or are these kind of just all equally spread out?
It's kind of equal, but it's funny because this is one of the historical myths that I get from both pagans and both atheists, neo-pagans, and modern pagans, and from Christians. But they're all using the myth in a different way. So Christians who don't like Christmas because it's not in the Bible, the kind of Christian that says if it's not in the Bible, it's not Christian. They say, well, we shouldn't be practicing anything to do with Christmas because it's all pagan in origin. And that's actually the beginning. That's the origin of this whole set of myths. It was actually Puritans largely in the 17th century that began this whole idea of Christmas being pagan, because they didn't like people having fun. They weren't keen on fun, the Puritans. And so, and they thought
the Southern Baptists continue that tradition.
Yeah, that's right. It's very strong. And so they didn't like any traditions that weren't biblical. And so they saw those as being Romish or Popish or being a little bit too Catholic. And the reason that was all wrong, they said, was because all that stuff was actually a holdover from paganism, which isn't correct. But this is where it all began. It all began largely in the 17th century with the Puritans. So the Christians who say this stuff say we shouldn't be doing this stuff because it's all pagan. Atheists use the myth in a different way. They say, look at these stupid Christians who are practicing, these Christmas traditions. Don't they realize that it's all pagan? Aren't they idiots? Right? And then you get the pagans, the modern neo-pagans, who say, these are our traditions. They were stolen from us by Christians and we need to claim them back. So they're all perpetuating the same myth, but they're doing it for different reasons. And they're all wrong.
Is there a myth that you find personally most annoying? I imagine it's probably the one that just gets repeated the most, but is there one that just like kind of grinds your gears, one that just irks you on some level more than the other?
It's the pagan Christmas tree one that really annoys me, because it's just so dumb. The other ones, there are arguments that could be made, and there certainly have been arguments made in the past by scholars that maybe sort of back it up, even though I think they're wrong, and modern and current scholarship is actually saying that they are wrong. But the Christmas tree as pagan thing is basically, well, pagans had traditions to do with trees, therefore, it's pagan. And you sort of say, okay, well, where's the evidence that there's any connection between modern Christmas tree traditions and any of these traditions to do with trees? Don't you understand, you idiot? Pagans had traditions to do with trees. Look at this reference in Tacitus to them worshipping in groves of trees. Fine, but where's the bit where it says, and then they set up a fir tree at the winter solstice as part of their solstice celebrations? Doesn't matter, they had traditions to do with trees. Here's a reference to something to do with oak trees. Okay, that's an oak tree and it's got nothing to do with solstice. Where's the connection? There's no references at all to Christmas trees before about the 15th century, where they seem to have arisen. So there's a huge gap between anything that pagans might have been doing with trees and where Christmas trees actually appear. So there's no evidence connecting the two, and there should be. We should have, if there's continuity between these pagan, whatever they were, pagan traditions to do with trees and modern Christmas trees, we should have lots of references in the early Middle Ages, the high Middle Ages, to people setting up trees. At Christmas time, we should have priests saying these terrible peasants are continuing to do this pagan thing with trees at the solstice, and it's bad. We should have references in ancient texts to pagan practices of setting up a tree at Christmas time or at solstice. We've got none of that. We just have Christmas trees kind of appearing in the 15th century. Now, what we can then do is look, okay, where did those Christmas trees come from? Do you want me to get onto that?
Well, yeah, let's get on that when we do quote lightning round,
Yeah,
which
okay.
probably won't be too much lightning, but
Yeah. So where do they come from?
Yeah.
There is no. So going back, like, there is no tradition. There's no evidence anywhere in any of the references that we have, which are pretty scanty, to Yule. So Yule was the Northern European, Germanic, and sort of Scandinavian winter time. Wasn't really a festival. It was kind of just a period. There's no references of any kind of midwinter Yule festival where you set up a tree and decorate it, or just bring a tree into the house, or just do anything at all with a fir tree or a conifer. None. The other claim is that the Romans had Christmas trees and they called them Saturnalia trees and they set them up in their houses. Zero reference anywhere in any Roman source to that. Right? So any article you read that claims that, it's just total nonsense. So where did they come from? What seems to have happened is in Germany, in the late Middle Ages, there was a tradition of putting on a play outside the church, or sometimes just inside the church, about Adam and Eve. So this was called the Paradise Play. It was very popular, and particularly in Western Germany, in the Rhineland area. And it was about how Adam and Eve get cast out of the Garden of Eden. And it had as its primary prop a tree representing the tree of paradise, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And it being Germany in the middle of winter, they would usually use a conifer. So they'd usually use a fir tree or a pine tree of some kind. And then they'd decorate it with apples. And it being in the middle of winter, usually they were fake apples. So they were just sort of like red balls, right? So they do this play where Adam and Eve would eat the apple, and then an angel would turn up and cast them out of the Garden of Eden. And it was quite a short play because it was middle of winter in Germany, so you wanted to get home back to the fire. But the climax of the play was the angel saying, one day in the future, a child will be born, a second Adam will be born, who will rectify all this by and take away original sin. So it was a play that was basically setting up the next day, which was Christmas Day, where they celebrate the birth of Jesus. What seems to have happened then is the idea of decorating a pine tree as a kind of a tree of paradise then sort of moved out of the church and into the public square. Various craft guilds would have a bit of a competition in this part of Germany to decorate the best paradise tree. So these paradise trees became a popular symbol of Christmas. What then seems to have happened is in the 16th century, in the wake of the Reformation, Lutherans were not keen on a lot of traditional Christmas decorations because they were just a little bit too Catholic. Things like nativity scenes, which were very popular. So they sort of started saying, well, you can't put up nativity scenes. So what people did instead was they brought the tree of paradise into the home. And in Germany, they're still often called, Christmas trees are often still called paradise trees as a result. And one of the traditional decorations that you can find in Germany to put on your Christmas tree is a little figure of Adam and Eve standing next to a tree with apples on it. So this seems to be the way in which the tradition began. It began as this play to do with Adam and Eve, and then it turned into kind of a Christmas decoration due to that association. And then it became something that people set up in their homes. It spread from Germany, but it was mainly a sort of a Central European custom for quite a while, spread into the Baltic. But it really took off in the 19th century because Queen Victoria of Britain was a German. Her family were German. She was from the family of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. They now call themselves the House of Windsor, but they're a German family. And she spoke German, and she had very sort of German, traditional German practices, including putting up a Christmas tree. And what happened was, because she was considered a great trendsetter, when pictures in illustrated newspapers began to appear of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert celebrating Christmas with their family, and there was this beautiful tree with candles and decorations on it, they became really cool. And so they took off across the world, including in the United States, and then across the English-speaking world, and then throughout the world generally. So people think that Christmas trees are this ancient, very, very common practice that has always been practiced for centuries, and so goes back to pagan times. Actually, they've only been popular since about the 19th century. Before that, they only date back to the 16th century in the home, and then back to this paradise tree tradition in the 15th century. And there is absolutely no evidence of them anywhere before that. So there's no connection back to any kind of pagan time at all.
Yeah, I know. I know the Pilgrims actually connected Christmas trees with Asheroth poles. I think there's they cited Jeremiah specifically about don't bring Asheroth poles into your home. So if you actually know what an Asheroth pole looks like, that and a conifer are not exactly analogous.
No. And you know, it often the passage that gets cited is Jeremiah 10:1-5, that basically says, don't cut down a tree from the forest, the work of the hands of the workman with an axe. Don't decorate it with silver and gold, and then fasten it with nails and hammers and so on. And people, those guys and the Puritans said, yeah, this is saying that you shouldn't decorate Christmas trees. Actually, what that passage is about is making idols. So it's saying don't cut down a tree and then shape the wood into an idol and then decorate it with metal that you nail to it and then set it up and worship it, because that whole passage in Jeremiah is about idol worship. It's got nothing to do with trees. So that's a misuse of that biblical passage.
Yeah. Quick little factoid for you, Tim. Did you know what in Jewish tradition what the fruit that Adam and Eve originally ate is?
I know it's not an apple.
It's a pomegranate.
Yeah, I was pretty sure it was a pomegranate. Yeah.
Do you know how historians somewhat think the apple came associated with the fruit?
Not sure. I think it's probably because they're both round and red.
A little bit. There's also, I don't speak Latin, so I will not attempt this, but how apple is spelled in Latin and how bad is spelled in Latin are the same. They just put stresses on different verbs. Okay. And so it kind of came to see as like a pun on like, if you eat an apple, you became bad, right? So that would have happened, centuries into Catholicism.
That would make sense. I'm trying to remember the Latin word for apple, but yes, it does. The Latin for bad is mal.
Yeah.
So malo. So yeah. So it would be there is a connection there. That makes sense.
All right, let's get into somewhat of a lightning round. Is Santa based on Odin? No. This was actually asked of me by several atheist friends. Like, I've always heard that Santa's based on Odin.
No. And I've been trying to track down where that came from, because I've only started to see that quite recently. So this is what happens all the time with this stuff. People sort of go, well, here's an element that is associated with Christmas. So let's say Santa. Santa's got a white beard. Santa rides through the night, rides through the air in the sleigh, and he's got like 8 reindeer. And Santa comes down the chimney and gives presents to people. Odin had a white beard. Odin flew through the sky on an 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, and Odin used to come down the chimney and give presents to children. The only bit of that that's correct is the riding through the sky on an 8-legged horse. Odin is never depicted with a white beard. He's always referred to as having a grey beard, so not white. And Odin, there's no references anywhere to Odin coming down chimneys and giving presents to children, mainly because when people believed in Odin, there was no such thing as chimneys. But even coming through the smoke hole in the roof of your long hall, there's no references to him doing that. Also, Odin wasn't like some kindly figure who gave presents to children. Odin was a very, very scary figure. He was a highly ambiguous figure. He was actually kind of spooky. So he was
missing an eye.
Oh yeah, and he kills people in battle, and he's a magician, and you never quite know whether he's going to be on your side or someone else's.
This sounds like a great making of a B-movie Christmas movie.
True. Scary Odin. But yeah, so the connections between, but people sort of make up stuff added to some things which are actually true, and like the eight-legged horse and flying through the sky. But even the flying through the sky stuff is actually quite late in the Santa Claus tradition. I've only been able to find references to it in the 18th century, and they're pretty vague. And most of the stuff about the reindeer and all that stuff, that's all 19th century American additions to the traditions. So these things that people think, this happens all the time, like the Christmas tree. People think Christmas trees have been around forever. They haven't. People think Christmas trees have been ubiquitous. They haven't. They've been largely a German thing. Same with the whole idea of Santa flying through the sky. That only goes back a couple of centuries. Santa with reindeer pulling his sleigh, that goes back to the 19th century. These things are not old traditions, so they're definitely not connected to Odin. So no, Santa and Odin, there's absolutely no connection at all. That's completely stupid.
We already went through pretty good on Christmas trees, but can you walk us through like why the date for Christmas was picked and why Christmas is not a replacement for Saturnalia, Sol Invictus, why Horus and Mithra were not born on the 25th? Those seem to be all kind of muddled together.
Sure. So in summary, in the 19th century, there was this very, very sort of common idea called the history of religions thesis, which was that Christianity was largely a syncretic religion that had borrowed a lot from the religions around it. Now, that's not a completely invalid idea. And we can find evidence of Christianity borrowing from the religions around it. So the traditional depiction of Jesus and Mary, the baby Jesus sitting on the lap of the Virgin Mary, is very much influenced by similar depictions of Isis and Horus. That is true. But what happened was that in the 19th century, folklorists got really carried away with this idea, and we're looking for parallels everywhere. And of course, if you go looking for parallels, if you look hard enough, you'll find them, or you'll find things that kind of look a bit like parallels. And then what you can do is you can then sort of say, well, parallel, therefore derivation, even though that doesn't actually follow. So what they kind of did was they ran with this idea and said, well, December 25th doesn't make sense as a Christian tradition because there's no reference in the Bible to exactly when Jesus was born, certainly not in terms of time of year. So it can't be that. So it has to be syncretic. It has to be that they borrowed it from some pagan festival. And then they looked at pagan festivals in December. There's Saturnalia. Saturnalia was a feast of Saturn, a very ancient Roman feast, and it was in December, and it involved partying and giving gifts. There we are. Christmas is Saturnalia. Problem, well, there's several problems. First of all, Saturnalia fell on December 17th, not December 25th. It became a little bit extended because it was a very popular festival. It was a good time of year to be feasting because it's middle of winter. So it became very popular, and as a result, it extended by 3 days. But that still only takes us up to December 20th. So we're still not near December 25th. Later on, it got extended into a week-long festival, but that still only gets you to December 24th. In none of its manifestations did Saturnalia ever encompass December 25th. So as a explanation for December 25th, Saturnalia doesn't really work. So that one doesn't work. So the other one that you often get,
and add into that, Andrew Mark Henry, he's got a YouTube channel, Religion for Breakfast. He did like a full hour and a half kind of breakdown. And it was also interesting how yes, I mean, these things evolve and are fluid over time. How it was also practiced seems to be very Rome centered versus much more sporadically. And also, there's, I think a lot of people, especially today, come in from the fact oh, it's set now, therefore it was set by the Council of Nicaea or by the apostles so many years ago. And it's this, do you see how our culture flows and is fluid and it's just, I mean, you're in Australia, I'm in America, but even within our own countries, there are different pockets of cultures where, you go up and down the seaboard, it could be wait, what are they talking about?
So,
So
so
I've
to generalize, I think what you're saying there is to generalize from one sort of piece of evidence that could be, purely to do with what was going on in Rome, the city, and so this is what the Romans, what their whole empire did is simply not correct. But what we do know is that Saturnalia wasn't on December 25th. So what they then try and do is they then sort of say, well, okay, well, it wasn't Saturnalia but it was the Feast of Sol Invictus. So we've got two references. One is in a document called the Philokan calendar, also known as the chronography of 354. This is a list of festivals and feast days for the year 354 celebrated in Rome. So it is quite specifically Rome. And on December 25th in the Philokan calendar, we find two festivals mentioned. One is the Feast of the Nativity of Christ. So in 354, they were already celebrating Christmas. They were celebrating the birth of Jesus on December 25th. The other, though, is it designates games, so chariot races, for the unconquered one, Invictus. This is interpreted by most current scholars as being a reference to Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, the sun god. So, okay, we've got Sol Invictus having chariot races celebrating him on December 25th. And we also have a reference from about a century before from the emperor, an edict by the Emperor Aurelian, who designated December 25th as the birthday, the Natavia of Sol Invictus. So you could sort of say, well, here you are. We've got Sol Invictus's birthday on December 25th. We've got chariot races on December 25th in celebration of the unconquered one. There it is. The problem is that there are no references to any kind of sun worship festival on December 25th before that decree by Aurelian. Decree by Aurelian in the middle of the 3rd century was a new thing. This was not some ancient celebration of the sun god on December 25th. What Aurelian was doing was he was instituting a new state religion, and he decided that the sun god was going to be the focus of this new religion. He was doing that because the Roman Empire in his time had almost fallen apart, and he had just fought a series of wars to bring it all back together. And so he was looking for a religion that would unite the Roman Empire, and he said, well, basically, the sun god is going to be it. So that institution of a celebration of the birth of the sun god on December 25th in the middle of the 3rd century was brand new. And here's the problem. We got references to Christians celebrating Jesus' birth on December 25th that date to before that point. So Hippolytus of Rome, writing in about 220s, maybe 230s, was already talking about Jesus being born on December 25th. So the Sol Invictus date of December 25th is not the origin of Christmas. It has to be something else. So what is it? Okay. What is it? Well, in the 2nd century, Christian writers were thinking a lot more about where Jesus fitted into history. They all believed that Jesus was the climax of history, but they were doing what we call sacred chronography, where they were mapping the life of Jesus across the year, and were also trying to work out when Jesus was in the timescale of history. One of the things that we get from this is our BC AD dating system, or if you don't like that, the BCE CE dating system. It's the same thing. That was come up with by a guy called Dionysius Exiguus, also known as Dennis the Little, and he worked out when Jesus died. He calculated when Jesus died based on the Gospels. So because he was, they worked out that he would have been executed on 14 Nisan in the Jewish lunar calendar. That would correspond to 33 AD and the 25th of March. So they calculated that Jesus died on the 25th of March in 33 AD. What exactly happened next is a little bit difficult to see, but what we think happened is there was a Jewish tradition that great prophets and patriarchs died on the same date that they were born. So effectively, they died on their birthday. bit of a bummer for them, but that's what they believe. They like the symmetry of that. What Christians in the 2nd century decided was that Jesus had died on the same date that he was conceived, because the conception of Jesus was the bigger event for Christianity, because that was miraculous. He was conceived by a virgin. So he was conceived on March 25th. Add 9 months to March 25th, and you get to December 25th. And the reason this one seems to have stuck, there were various other dates being kicked around and proposed on various bases for when Jesus was born, when Jesus died. But the reason these two stuck is that March 25th was the traditional date of the spring equinox, and December 25th was the traditional date of the winter solstice, which is why Aurelian put that his new festival of the birthday of the sun on December 25th. So the reason this stuck is that it maps Jesus cosmologically, and it maps him chronologically across the year. It has him being conceived at the spring equinox and being born in the absolute depths of winter, and so he's kind of representing the returning sun. So there is a link to this conception of the world and thinking about the cycles of the sun and cycles of the seasons. But it's not, they stole a pagan festival. What they were doing was they were trying to work out, using the Bible, they were trying to work out when was he in time, and when was he also in terms of cosmology. How does he fit into the structure of the universe? And that's why this March 25th, December 25th conception, actually this calculation actually turned out to be the one that stuck. That seems to be why we've got December 25th.
But also very Jewish, like a lot of Jewish festivals also correspond with equinoxes and new moon festivals and stuff like that. So it's...
Yeah, that's right. And I think part of that is, this is something that a scholar called Eleanor Parker, I'm reading a book right now. She sort of says, look, the reason you get these festivals all happening at around about the same time, it's not because you've got Christians stealing festivals from pagans and from Jews. It's because in these times, people lived much, much closer to nature than we do. They were agrarian people. So there are certain times of the year where you're going to have a feast because it's straight after harvest. There are other times of the year where you've got time to actually have a bit of a break and a bit of a holiday, midwinter. So there are spaces in the year where it just makes sense when you're living in close connection to the land and farming. It makes sense to be doing things at certain times. So it's not as simple as Christians coming along and stealing festivals. It's just, they lived in a similar cycle of the year, and that's why there were spaces for these things to pop up and just take different forms.
We are going to take a short break for a word from our sponsor. Today's sponsor is Cobb Technologies. Cobb Technologies is copiers and IT services local to Charlottesville, Virginia, and the #1 independent dealer in Virginia. Cobb relishes both new and existing clientele partnerships. Cobb also has a nonprofit arm which helps disadvantaged and hospitalized children. Contact local Cobb consultant Doug Woodside at 434-960-3000. We're going to take a quick break and have a word from a sponsor. Shenandoah Coffee Roasters has been a staple of Charlottesville since 1993. They offer over 25 varieties of specialty, boutique, and gourmet coffee using only the finest Arabia coffee from all over the world. Coffee is their passion, and they painstakingly search out the best coffee available. Nothing is taken for granted as they continually strive to provide the best coffee they possibly can. They roast all their coffees to order based on the needs of their espresso bar, ensuring that only the freshest and highest quality coffee leaves their roasting house. Grab a cup at any of their 3 locations, Main Restaurant Preston, on the corner, or on Ivy Road, or order a bag online at shenandoahjoe.com. Now, was Horus and Mithra, were they born on December 25th? Were there festivals on December 25th? Are they any way connected to December 25th?
Okay, Horus, no. And that's just one of these things that someone just made up at some point. A lot of this stuff people just make up crap. Horus, no. Horus, I think, was meant to be born in August. Mithras,
but that's also the thing with Horus is like he has like three or four different myth cycles as well. Like yeah, there's the big popular one, but there are also
yeah,
other ones in within Horus's like what 4,000 year
yeah,
mythological
that's right.
arc that he's in, that he's worshipped in. I mean, yeah, he's worshipped for millennia
Yeah,
in Egypt, and as with a lot of things, kind of his story ebbs and flows, and new things are added and things are taken away. So, but the most popular story we have of Horus, yes, would be in August.
yeah, and this is what I mean about back in the 19th century when they were doing this sort of this history of religions parallel mania. Um, they go looking for parallels. Now, if you've got something that's like a 4,000 year tradition of Horus, you look hard enough, you can find something in there that you might be able to consider to be a parallel, and then you can claim that it's evidence of derivation. But this is cherry picking evidence. So yeah, Horus, no. Um, Mithras, the reason you see it claimed all the time that Mithras had some kind of festival on December 25th is because of that Philokan calendar reference that I mentioned before, because it said we're going to celebrate games on December 25th for the Unconquered One. One of the titles of Mithras, he had many titles, but one of the titles of Mithras was Invictus, the Unconquered. He was also called Sol Invictus because he was a sun god as well, though he was also kind of connected to the sun god Sol, so it's all a bit complicated. But so for a long time there, a lot of scholars, and a few still do, but a lot of scholars think that the Philokan calendar reference to the Unconquered One was a reference to Mithras because it uses that term Invictus, the Unconquered One, and that was one of the many titles of Mithras. Most scholars these days agree that this isn't a reference to Mithras. So the first problem is if you take that one reference away, there's absolutely nothing connecting Mithras to December 25th. I mean nothing. The second problem is that the idea that a Mithraic festival would have been something that people would have been celebrating widely in the streets is totally contrary to everything we know about Mithraism. Because Mithraism was a mystery cult. It was a secret society. You had to be invited to join it. And we don't know much about it because they didn't write anything down because it was a secret. You had to be initiated into the 12 levels of initiation that they had. We've only got fragments of ideas about what they did because it was literally underground. They had temples that were underground or in caves, or if they were in buildings, they decorated on the inside to make it look like a cave. It was all meant to be hidden. It was all meant to be very, very secret. It was men only. So there were no female Mithraists. And it was very much like, it was a bit like the Masons. Like you had to know someone and you had to be invited. So the idea that they would have been prancing through the streets celebrating the birth of Mithras, that's not how Mithraism worked. So no, Mithras, no, Horus, no.
All right. Is mistletoe of Druid origin? Was holly ever used to honor Saturn?
Yeah. I've been able to find absolutely no references to holly or mistletoe or ivy or conifers or fir trees or pine trees being used to honor Saturn or to being used as part of the Saturnalia festival, which we've already established was like earlier in December anyway. Um, there were there were cultic associations with mistletoe because mistletoe is a weird plant. It's a parasite, grows on other trees. So it was sort of seen, and it's an evergreen. So it was sort of seen as being obviously a little bit magical. And yeah, there is evidence that in some Celtic pre-Christian Celtic traditions, mistletoe had magical associations, and we have Pliny the Elder talking about how druids used to go out at the full moon and cut mistletoe using a golden sickle. If anyone's ever read the Asterix comics, you'll know that this was a major part of Getafix the Druid. And this so yes, there was a connection between druids, whatever whoever they were. That's pretty vague. And mistletoe, and there seems to have been a religious connection there. Has that got any connection at all to do with our traditions about kissing on the mistletoe? No, that doesn't pop up until the 18th century. It seems to be because people did use mistletoe like holly and ivy and other evergreens to decorate their houses at Christmas time. So if you've got some mistletoe above the door, and you want to kiss a pretty girl, then it wouldn't be too hard to invent, oh, it's an old tradition. No, 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 I've got to kiss you. Right? We all know that guy. We've all been to parties with that guy. That seems to be what's happened, right? So why were they decorating with mistletoe and ivy and holly? Well, because they're evergreen. So if you're going to decorate your home in middle of winter in Northern Europe, you're not going to decorate it with bare sticks. You're going to decorate it with the few plants that are around that are actually kind of bright and green. So that's why they use that. How far back does that go? We don't know. We do have references in medieval records to ordering the cutting of holly and so on to decorate the church and decorate the hall for the Christmas feast. So decorating with that stuff does go back a long way. Does it go back to pre-Christian times? We don't know. Maybe. Yeah, I mean, they like to decorate as well, maybe, but there's zero references anywhere in any of the material that we have, which is not much, to people decorating their homes at, say, at Yule time or at the winter solstice with that stuff. They might have. It could be pre-Christian. Is it pagan? Who knows? So it's maybe pre-Christian, could have had some pagan associations, don't know. But is that where it comes from? No. And the kissing under the mistletoe thing, that seems to be just a modern idea invented in the 18th century by some creepy guy who wanted to kiss women.
Awesome. Thanks, creepy guy who wanted to kiss women. That is sarcastic. Don't actually mean that. So wrapping up, we live in a Hydra-like world of misinformation. What do you think is the reason for people to spread such disinformation about Christmas traditions and origins? And why also do you think is the reason people so easily fall into believing such disinformation?
Sure. Well, I think I touched on it before when I said that all of those three groups, Christians, atheists, and pagans, have different motivations for propagating this. So some Christians don't think that anything that's unbiblical or that's not biblically based should be part of any kind of Christian practice. So that's their motivation. Atheists just like mocking Christians, saying, "Ha ha, you're perpetuating a pagan festival and you think you're Christians." That's their motivation. And then the neo-pagans, they really don't have a lot of stuff that they can reliably trace back to being genuinely pagan, and so they like to kind of prop their ideas up a bit. So they can say, well, this Christmas stuff, it's all actually pagan. I think that's one reason. The reason people resist it, I mean, I'm in the middle of a Twitter exchange with a guy who was really pushing back really, really hard with not much in response, but he just does not want to accept that maybe what he's always believed about this stuff is wrong. And a lot of it is just cognitive dissonance. Most people don't like changing their minds. And when this stuff has been, you see it everywhere. You see it online. I mean, every Christmas you'll get these pagan origins of Christmas stories. They're written by journalists, and they research them in inverted commas by going and reading a similar article by another journalist a couple of years ago. So it's just this endless cycle of nonsense. They never check their facts, but people see it all the time, and so it just becomes this thing that everyone knows. So when someone like me comes along and says, it's not true, and here's why it's not true, I get people very annoyed because they just don't like to accept that perhaps maybe they might need to change their mind. Also, because there's the whole confirmation bias psychological driver, if something sort of fits with something that you already believe, then it's very difficult to accept that maybe it might be wrong. So when people maybe have a bit of a prejudice against Christianity, for example, and this seems to make Christianity look stupid, it's far easier for them to accept that it's true rather than listen to someone like me who comes along and shows them that it isn't. So I think this will always be like trying to empty the ocean with a cup. But nevertheless, every Christmas, I will continue the fight. And what I am seeing is more and more people are starting to sort of say, well, actually, apparently that's not true. So I'm just starting to see that a little bit. So who knows? Maybe one day, but I'm not holding out great hope.
If you could predict the next bad history take on Christmas. What do one that you haven't seen before? What do you think that could look like?
Okay, I predict that sometime in the future there will be someone, so a folklorist or someone online who claims that the elf on the shelf tradition is an ancient pagan tradition. The elf on the shelf tradition actually goes back to 2005.
Yeah, I was like, that's I remember when that was starting.
Exactly. But I've already had people tell me, oh, no, it's very, very old. And I'd say, where's it go back to? Oh, it goes back to Victorian England. And then I show them, it was a book and a toy. It was actually a marketing campaign. The book actually has on the cover, apparently has a Christmas tradition, making out that it is something that's been going on for a long time.
Well, that's a great selling point. That's a great selling point.
Exactly. Yeah, it was invented in 2005. And it only goes back that far. So I predict sometime in the future there's going to be someone who's saying, well, look, it involves elves, and the pagans believed in elves, and the elf is doing mischievous things, and the pagans believed elves could be mischievous. I mean, you could use all the arguments that you see about Christmas trees and the date of Christmas and so on to argue that the elf on the shelf is an ancient pagan tradition, and you would be completely wrong. So let's look forward to that.
Oh, that's great. All right, I got one more Christmas thing for you, and then I'll let you go. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie?
I believe so.
Okay. All right. We'll agree to disagree on that one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Tim O'Neill, thank you so much for being on. And look for Tim on Twitter. Tim, what's your Twitter handle while Twitter is still here?
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's still around. I'm at Tim O'Neill 007 because all the other Tim O'Neills had taken all the other numbers. So at Tim O'Neill 007.
And you can find Tim blogging at
historyforatheists.com. So History for Atheists, all one word.
And you also have a YouTube channel. Is that also History for Atheists?
That's right. So you can find me on YouTube on that as well, and find me on various podcast platforms as well.
And I will link all those in the description. Tim, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rob.
Our album art was done by my wife, and our theme music was composed by TJ Stokes.